أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to Tuesday night program in which we are also commemorating the Shahadat of our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wassalam. Inshallah, tonight's program will start with the recitation of Dua Tawassul, followed by the proper majlis, inshallah, will be conducted. We have Brother Zafar Jafri who will MC the program for Sawt, Salam and Marsiya, and we have a guest speaker, Sheikh Bilal Husain. Inshallah, will deliver the majlis in the end. And inshallah, we'll have the Noha and Tabut at the conclusion of the program. So without any further ado, inshallah, we will start with the recitation of Dua Tawassul. For that, I would request Abbas. Bismillah, Abbas. You can share the screen.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma inni as'aluka wa atawajjahu ilayka bi nabiyyika nabiyyir rahmah Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa alihi ya Abul Qasim ya Rasulallah ya Imam ar-Rahmah ya سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا 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 أبا إبراهيم يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضاء يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الحادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسقري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيحا عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا ساداتي وموالي يا ساداتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا ساداتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله الأعداء الله الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you very much, Brother Baz, for the recitation. Inshallah, we'll move forward with the program. For the Urdu program, inshallah, I would like to invite Brother Zafar Jafri to conduct the program tonight. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
تلاوت کلام پاک اور دعائے توسل سے شروع ہونے والے اس پروگرام کو آگے بڑھاتے ہوئے اب ہم اپنے ساتویں امام موسیٰ کاظم علیہ السلام کی شہادت کی مجلس کے حصے میں داخل ہو رہے ہیں۔ جیسا کہ آپ حضرات کے علم میں ہے، امام کی شہادت 25 رجب 183 ہجری میں ہارون رشید کے ایما پر ہوئی۔ مجلس میں 100 سلام برسیہ، مولانا قبلہ شیخ بلال صاحب کی تقریر، اس کے بعد شبیہ تابوت برآمد ہوگا اور نوحہ اور مات۔ مجلس کا آغاز کرتے ہیں، 4 مصرع پیش خدمت ہے، ملاحظہ فرمائیے۔ شیخ غم میں آنکھ نم تو کیجیے، شیخ غم میں آنکھ نم تو کیجیے، دل کو مانوش علم تو کیجیے، دل کو مانوش علم تو کیجیے، دور ہو جائیں گی ساری مشکلیں، دور ہو جائیں گی ساری مشکلیں، سر در حیدر پہ خم تو کیجیے، شیخ غم صلوات پڑھیے۔ محمد
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل۔
سلام کے چند شعر پیش خدمت ہے، جہاں باقر زیدی صاحب کا کلام ہے۔ کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ، کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ، کہ سر جھکا تو جھکا دل بھی ہے احترام کے ساتھ، کہ سر جھکا تو جھکا دل بھی ہے احترام کے ساتھ، کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ، یہ تجربتوں کا تصور چلوں گا میں بھی اسی عصر خوش خرام کے ساتھ، چلوں گا میں بھی اسی عصر خوش خرام کے ساتھ، اور کبھی امام کے پیچھے کبھی امام کے ساتھ، کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ، اور تیرے نصیب سے ظلمت نکل نہیں سکتی، تیرے نصیب سے ظلمت نکل نہیں سکتی، کہ تیرا دل ہے ابھی تک امیر شام کے ساتھ، کہ تیرا دل ہے ابھی تک امیر شام کے ساتھ کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ. اور یہ انتظار عبادت ہے، انتظار کرو. یہ انتظار عبادت ہے، انتظار کرو. مگر ہے شرط کہ ہو حسن التزام کے ساتھ کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ایک نظام کے ساتھ. میرا نصیب کہ میری شناخت ان سے ہے، میرا نصیب کہ میری شناخت ان سے ہے. بڑا کرم ہے یہ آقا کا اس غلام کے ساتھ. بڑا کرم ہے یہ آقا کا اس غلام کے ساتھ. کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ. اور جو منفرد ہو اسے منفرد ہی رکھتے ہیں. جو منفرد ہو اسے منفرد ہی رکھتے ہیں. کسی کا نام نہ لینا علی کے نام کے ساتھ. کسی کا نام نہ لینا علی کے نام کے ساتھ. کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ. اور مقطع پیش خدمت ہے. مشاعروں کو جو دیکھا تو یہ کھلا باقر. مشاعروں کو جو دیکھا تو یہ کھلا باقر. یہ حسن صوت بھی ہو خوبی کلام کے ساتھ. کمال حسن عقیدت ہے ان کے نام کے ساتھ. سر جھکا تو جھکا دل بھی احترام کے ساتھ. حضرات مرثیہ کے چند پیش خدمت ہیں، چند بند ایک سورہ فاتحہ کی درخواست ہے.
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم.
حضرات ایک سورہ فاتحہ کی اور درخواست کروں گا ان حضرات کے مومنین، خصوصاً ان حضرات کے مومنین جنہوں نے آج کے پروگرام کو اسپانسر کیا ہے، اور ہم سب کے مرحومین کے لیے.
الرحمن الرحیم ایاک نعبد و ایاک نستعین اهدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین انعمت علیہم اللهم صل علی
مرثیہ کے چند بند مولانا کی اجازت سے پیش خدمت ہے. سر پی تو آج موسی جعفر ہوا شہید. سر پی تو آج موسی جعفر ہوا شہید. ابن علی و ابن پیمبر ہوا شہید. غربت بے آہ کاظم بے پر ہوا شہید. لو مومنوں کا ساتواں رہبر ہوا شہید. لو مومنوں کا ساتواں رہبر ہوا شہید. پلوایا زہر بادشاہ خاص و عام کو، اور ہارون رشید مارا امام کو. ہارون رشید مارا امام کو. اور کس طرح سے بیان کروں ظلم اہل کی، افسوس پیٹ بھر کر کبھی کھانا ملا نہیں، اور فاقے پہ فاقے کرتا تھا احمد کا جانشین، اور زندہ میں 14 سال تھے محبوس شاہزین، زندہ میں 14 سال تھے محبوس شاہزین، طاقت نہ تھی ذرا بھی قعود و قیام کی، حالت یہ تھی امام علیہ السلام کی، حالت یہ تھی امام علیہ السلام کی، دی امت نبی کو نہ حضرت نے بدعا، اور ہر وقت شیخ کے لب پہ رہا شکر کبریا، اور سندھی کے تازیانوں کی ہر روز تھی جفا، اور بیٹھا تھا خون جسم سے روح الفدا، ایذائے قید ایسی کسی نے سہی نہیں، اور بیداد اس طرح کی کسی پر ہوئی، اور بیداد اس طرح کی کسی پر ہوئی نہیں، القصہ آب کو القصہ زہر آپ کو انگور میں دیا، جس سے جناب موسیٰ کاظم نے کی قضا، بعضوں نے لکھا ہے شہادت کا ماجرا، پگھلا کے شیشے آپ کو جب رن پلا دیا، پگھلا کے شیشے آپ کو جب رن پلا دیا، کیسا کہوں کہ حال ہوا کیا امام کا، اور جل کر کباب کلیجہ امام کا، اور جل کر ہوا کباب کلیجہ امام کا، اور غل پڑ گیا کہ موسیٰ کاظم نے کی قضا، اور لاشے کو راہ کے جسر پہ اعداء نے رکھ دیا، اور چہرے سے امام سے کپڑا ہٹا دیا، اور چہرہ امام سے کپڑا ہٹا دیا، اور 2 روز یوں ہی لاش کا چہرہ کھلا رہا، 2 روز یوں ہی لاش کا چہرہ کھلا رہا، تھی لاش بے کفن شہ عالی مقام کی، اور توقیر تھی یہ آل رسول انام کی، توقیر تھی یہ آل رسول انام کی، نزدیک بھائی تھا نہ پسر تھا نہ بھانجا، اور تنہائی میں ظلم و ستم و مصیبتاں، 2 روز تک تو جسر پہ لاشا پڑا رہا، اور میت پہ رونے والا بھی ہے کوئی نہ تھا، میت پہ رونے والا بھی ہے کوئی نہ تھا، صدمے اٹھا کے ہائے جہاں سے گزر گئے، غربت میں آہ کاظم ذی شان مر گئے، غربت میں آہ کاظم ذی شان مر گئے، اور شیعہ نثار آپ کی غربت کے یا امام، غربت میں تم شہید ہوئے اے شہ انام، اور بے جرم مارا آپ کو یا شاہ خاص و عام، اور ہارون نے کیا کہ آپ کا تمام، ہارون نے کیا کہ ہارون نے کیف کر دیا آپ کا تمام، خوف خدا نہ خوف رسول خدا کیا، اور شمع حیات آپ کی ظالم بجھا گیا، اور شمع حیات आपकी जालिम बुझा दिया और सर पीटवार मूसा जाफर हुआ शहीद. After this marcia, we are going towards English program, and I'm requesting Maulana Sheikh Bilal Husain Sahab Qibla that please recite the majlis. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Before we begin our majlis, there's a request for one Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas for أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات, خصوصا Sayyid Ali Raza Rizvi, who passed away today in Pennsylvania. One Surah Fatiha, 3 times Surah Ikhlas لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد
وآل محمد
وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة أرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
محمد. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكر استشهاد Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam. May Allah increase in our rewards for the commemoration and our grief over the shahadat and martyrdom of our 7th Imam, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam. This 7th Imam of ours, within him are certain lessons that they're very important to remember, and we'll discuss 2 important areas of learning from our 7th Imam and understanding from our 7th Imam, and then continue forward with our program. One of the goals of why we mention these affairs and we study these biographies and notice these points is the importance that when we want to commemorate the Shahadat of an Imam, or we want to build a relationship with an Imam, we have to have ma'rifat, or understanding of this Imam. Our goal when we talk about the Ahlul Bayt and we talk about these A'imma alayhimus salam is that we build a connection and we have a depth of understanding of what their message was to convey to us, and what their goal was for us to achieve in the proximity to Allah by the impact of their presence. In understanding the first of these 2 points that we want to share is beginning from one of the ahadith of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far himself, where we see our 7th Imam makes a statement, La ilma illa min alim al-Rabbani wa ma'rifatul alimu bil-aqli. Imam Musa ibn Ja'far makes the statement, he says that there is no knowledge that can be attained or achieved. There is no true knowledge that can be attained except illa min alim al-Rabbani, from a divinely appointed scholar. The only way that you can really attain a true knowledge is through the teachings of a divine scholar. وَمَعْرِفَةُ الْعَالِمِ بِالْأَقْلِ. And to recognize who is this divine scholar, it's necessary that we use our intellect to come to that conclusion. This point of the Imam, this statement of the Imam, is an important lesson for us. You see, today, when we look back and we question who are our Imams, we immediately take with pride and we make the statement, Nahnu ithna ashari. We are the 12ers. We believe in the 12 A'imma alayhimus salam, and we are their followers, and they are the true representatives of Allah on this earth. They are awliya Allah. But one of the important points to note is that our belief in these Imams is generally because we inherited the belief. Our forefathers, our parents, they believed in the 12 Imams and they taught us this belief. We inherited it, and this is the process by which we live our lives. However, in history, it was never so clear as to which the process of chain of A'imma and the status of A'imma was so clear that people would without a doubt always know who the Imam was and always could say with confidence that they were Ithna Ashari. Some, even if they said they were Ithna Ashari, they didn't know who the Imam would be or who the Imam was in their lifetime. Sometimes when contemporary people say that, how do you know who is the Imam or who is the Imam one after another? They say, well, we know that Imamat after Imam Ali was only in one pair of brothers, Imam Hassan and Imam Husain. And then after that, it passed from father to son. And the passage of Imamat from father to son, if we were to look in history, many people would simply say, yes, the Imam would pass the Imamat to his oldest son and the matter would be declared. However, in history, the affair was not always so clear and so simple. It happened many times that there were difficult moments in the passage of history in determining who was the Imam of the time. Whether we take a look at after the Shahadat of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, where some followed Zayd, the brother of Imam al-Baqir, others followed Imam al-Baqir. Whether we take a look at one of the major inflection points in history, the life of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Whether you look at the start of his imamat or the end of his imamat, there were breaks between the Shia. Whether we take a look and we see at other inflection points in the passage of history, even those who accept the wilayat of Amir al-Mu'mineen have not been continuous in their process of following the Ahlul Bayt. What we find is that the position of imamat is not something that was, for example, an inheritance that passed to the eldest son, but rather Allah has always indicated the position of imamat through His discretion and His choice. When Allah talks about in the Quran, "Inni ja'iluka lin-nasi imama," Allah is the one who says that I dictate where imamat goes. It is not a matter of inheritance. And our ability to determine where imamat lies is by looking for the attributes and characteristics as identified through the intellect that an imam must possess. And when an imam possesses these characteristics, we know for a fact that he is the imam of the time. Our responsibility today as mu'mineen, as lovers of Ahlul Bayt, is that we have been blessed with the inheritance of believing in the 12 imams. Alhamdulillah. But that true yaqeen and certainty in their imamat is established through the process of intellect, so that we are certain that we know who the imam is and why he is the imam. Both of these elements, when they are combined with the inheritance we have received from our parents, then we have the true benefit of learning from the imam. This is where the statement of the imam comes into play. La ilma illa min alimir rabbani. There is no knowledge that you will truly gain in this life except that knowledge which you attain from alim rabbani, a divine scholar, one who has attributes bringing him to the divine. وَمَعْرِفَةُ الْعَالِمِ بِالْعَقْلِ, that you have to use your intellect to find that scholar. The life of our seventh Imam is one of the inflection points in history in the study of the Shia faith that shows that sects had broken off from the main branch of 12 or Shiaism because of the condition that was presented in the life of our seventh Imam. In the life of our seventh Imam, we see that Ma'mun, the Abbasid Khulafa, who had established their authority on this earth on the basis of their proximity and relationship to the Holy Prophet, were working to suppress that the knowledge that there were people closer to the Prophet than the Abbasids. And the consequence of this suppression was that the matter of imamat had to be something that was very discreet and was not publicly discussed. So therefore, the Imam teaching us that you have to use your intellect to identify the Imam of the time was one of the necessities for people to be able to determine who their Imam was. And when we use our intellect, we see the attributes in Imam Musa ibn Ja'far that demonstrated from his childhood that he was the Imam after his father, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Now, when we look at this, we see that, for example, there are narrations and discussions. And one of the things that happens is in terms of intellect, at times there's an absence of the discussion of the teachings of Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. It's assumed that the teaching in Islam in Madhab Ja'fari happened primarily under Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq, which is true. But Imam al-Kadhim's dawr in teaching and the sharing of his intellect with society has a very powerful position as well too. And from Imam al-Kadhim, we have received many narrations. If we wanted to understand the narrations of Imam al-Kadhim, we could look and see there is a book called Mawsu' al-Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. This Mawsu' of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is a 3-volume work which includes over 1,000 pages of ahadith of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam on all the subjects of knowledge and teaching. And this 1,000-page work is but what has reached us. Imagine what the Imam spent his life in teaching. Now, when we look at this process of this Imam, we see his attributes from his childhood of both teaching as well as being the representative of Islam and the educator of Islam. I'll share with you 2 examples and inshallah we'll move on with our discussion. One example comes from the story of a group of Jewish people who came to visit our 6th Imam. And when they sat with the 6th Imam, they said that we have read that the offsprings of the Prophet are the inheritors of the earth and that they are the leaders of society on this land. If you are truly the offspring of a prophet of God, then why do we find you not in the position of authority, but rather we see you in a position of suppression, that you have been blocked from society? And Imam as-Sadiq replied, it has always been that the righteous people of this earth are the ones who are oppressed, and the oppressor is the one who keeps them from their right. So these Jewish people, they said, then tell us, if your forefather was truly the Prophet of Allah, then it must be that he possessed some miracles and characteristics, and that you possess a knowledge that cannot be attained by men, that we should be able to see from you that you are truly the representative of Allah on this earth. They wanted to see the status of alim rabbani. The knowing of the divinely appointed scholar is not simply an attribute that Islam says that you need to have when finding your leader of the time, but even all of those religions that came from Nabi Ibrahim possess the same attribute, that where the Jews, when they wanted to test and see, are these Muslims truthful, they looked to see, are there divinely appointed scholars amongst them? So they said, do you have proof that you possess a knowledge that can only be learned by Allah that would prove to us that you are Allah's authority on this earth? The 6th Imam turned and he called for Imam Musa ibn Ja'far to be brought before him. When Imam al-Kadhim is brought, he's only of the age of 5 years. And Imam Sadiq says, "O Musa, put your hand on my chest." And he says, "Oh Allah, guide this son of mine who is your authority on this earth." And then Imam Sadiq says, "Now, O people who wish to question our authority on this earth, I present you before you my 5-year-old son. Ask him whatever you want to, and he will tell you whatever you wish to know." In this situation, the Jewish scholars, these people who had come to question Imam, they see a 5-year-old boy standing in front of them and they wonder, what can he tell us? So they ask him a question. They say that Musa, our prophet Musa, possessed miracles. Account for us what were the miracles of Nabi Musa. So Imam Musa ibn Ja'far replies and he narrates all of the 9 miracles of Nabi Musa. And for the brevity of our discussion, we'll say that he announced the 9 of them. After which they said, if your forefather was truly a prophet, then he should too possess miracles similar to what our prophet Musa possessed. Did your forefather have any miracles? So Imam Musa ibn Ja'far replies, he says, listen carefully and I will number them for you. In this hadith that's narrated in Bihar al-Anwar, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far narrates over 30 miracles that were performed by our Holy Prophet in his lifetime. The end of which, when he completes his narration of 30 to 35 miracles, which included, for example, feeding many people with a small amount of bread, being invisible in front of his enemies, when the camels would come and cry and complain to the Holy Prophet, when the Prophet could speak to trees, when there was an empty well that the Prophet put his saliva into the well and the well became full of water, that the Prophet had knowledge of the unseen of what people possessed with them, that the Prophet took a small amount of food and fed his entire army, that at a time when there was a great thirst, the Prophet passed water between his fingers and quenched the thirst of thousands of people. As Imam al-Kadhim continues to mention all of these miracles, that when Abu Lahab wanted to throw a stone at him, he found that no prophet was present, though the prophet was sitting there. When another man tried to assassinate the Holy Prophet, he could not see him. When Abu Lahab wanted to ridicule the Prophet, he found a giant monster standing there, stopping him from approaching the Prophet. All of these attributes, as Imam Musa ibn Ja'far is narrating, and he narrates 35 of them, the end of which these Jewish men, with their confusion, they say, how do we know anything that you said is true? The 5-year-old Imam turns and he says, how do we know that any of the miracles that you heard about your prophet Musa are true? And the Jewish men replied, they said, well, they were received to us by pious men in history. That pious men told us that Musa, the prophet of Allah, performed these miracles. So Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, standing in front of this group of Jewish questioners, turns and he says, and these miracles have been announced to you by a 5-year-old child who has never been educated by anyone else, and the only source of knowledge he possesses is that which Allah provides for him today. This explanation that they were listening from a 5-year-old child, the miracles of both Nabi Musa and of Rasulullah, was a demonstrated proof enough of the divinely inspired knowledge that was present in Imam al-Kadhim that they immediately submitted to the religion of Islam and accepted the authority of the Ahlul Bayt. The knowledge of Imam al-Kadhim was such that even as a child, he was the teacher who presented this in knowledge and information that people needed to learn and know about. In another famous narration, Abu Hanifa comes to visit Imam al-Sadiq, but finds that Imam al-Sadiq is occupied and he can't get an audience with Imam al-Sadiq. So he sees the young child, Imam al-Kadhim, and he says, you are the son of an Imam. Let me see if I can get the answer to my question from you. Notice that even a scholar of any other madhab knows that the knowledge of imamat spreads into his children, and the child of an imam has enough knowledge that it can satisfy and satiate a scholar of another madhab. Abu Hanifa turns to the child Imam al-Kadhim and he says, you are the son of an imam, let me see if you can answer my question. Imam al-Kadhim says, ask your question. Abu Hanifa says, Is Allah responsible for the actions that a man performs? Or is Allah the partner of the man in his actions? Or does a man choose to perform his actions of his own accord? Imam al-Kadhim as a child replies, "Oh Abu Hanifa, if Allah is responsible for the actions of a man, then on the day of judgment, it is Allah who should be punished for the sins of a person, not the person. Therefore, we say that Allah is not in control." Now, he says option number 2 is that the man and Allah are partners in the act, that an action is performed by both the man and by Allah, in which case Allah and the man on the day of judgment should be partners in the punishment. And then Imam al-Kadhim continues, the third option is that a man alone is responsible for his sins, in which case he alone bears the burden of the punishment on the day of judgment. Oh, Abu Hanifa, that certainly man is free in his discretion to perform sin. If he was compulsed by Allah, if he was forced by Allah to perform an action, then Allah would be one who shares in the punishment, or Allah would be the one who should be punished for that sin. And we know that that's not possible. Therefore, we know that man has his freedom in the actions that he chooses to perform. These examples were a way from the childhood for us to be able to determine where the imamat went after Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam. After Imam as-Sadiq, because of the oppression of the Abbasid Khulafa, it was uncertain where imamat would go. Some people went to the older brother of Imam al-Kadhim, Abdullah al-Fatah, and became Fatahiyya. Others went to Ismail, the older brother of Imam al-Kadhim, who passed away in the life of Imam as-Sadiq, and they became Ismailiyya. And others became into other sects, but the truth was that it stayed with Imam al-Kadhim, as was demonstrated by his knowledge. And for us, it's an important lesson to learn that we need to understand the attributes of the Imam and understand his knowledge, so that when we are asked on the day of judgment who our Imam is, we don't simply say that we inherited who the Imam was, but rather we know with certainty and we have yaqeen that the divine knowledge present in the Imam that our intellect brought us to was the source of our guidance and the source of our teaching. This is the first half of our discussion, the importance of using our intellect to recognize and know the Imam. And that knowing the Imam on the principle of intellect is a source by which we receive guidance from the Imam, and that we ask for shifa'ah from that Imam. The second half of our discussion relies around the verses that we began our discussion with today in Surah Ali Imran, verse number 133, 134, where Allah says, وَالصَّارِعُ إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ أَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. In verse 133 and 134 of Surah Ali Imran, Allah says, and hasten to forgiveness from your Lord. سَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. And a garden, the extensiveness of which is the heavens and the earth. It is prepared for those who guard against evil. أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, the possessors of taqwa. Then Allah now elaborates who are the possessors of taqwa. And He says, الَّذِينَ, those who spend benevolently in ease as well as in difficulty. When they have a lot, they give, and when they have a little, they give. And وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, and those who restrain their anger, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and show pardon and forgiveness to mankind. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and certainly Allah loves the doers of good. This verse mentions the famous characteristic by which our seventh Imam is known, Al-Kadhim, as Al-Kadhimin al-Ghayth, those who suppress their anger, who restrain their anger. Our seventh Imam's attribute by which he is most famous is Al-Kadhim, one who restrains his anger. This attribute of the Imam is a very interesting attribute in that it is not like, for example, the pious one. It is not like Az-Zainul Abidin. The attribute of the Imam is not tied directly to the worship of Allah, but rather points to a character or a quality of character that is present within the Imam and his dealing with society. You see, many times we think of Islam as a religion, and my goodness as a Muslim is associated with my piety to Allah. That, for example, I'm a good Muslim because I pray, because I fast, because, for example, I perform Salat al-Layl, because I've gone to Hajj 10 times, because I recite Ziyarat every Thursday night. We say, Hada Rajulun Tayyib. This is a good man. This is a Muslim. This is a pious man. But an attribute like Kadhim and the attribute of our second Imam, Al-Mujtaba, and the attribute of Al-Jawad, these are attributes of character that are present within the Imams that are highlighted in their personalities. And these characteristics that are highlighted are those in association with people and society. The lesson that we learn from knowing this is that to be a pious person, to be someone who is loved by Allah, one of the requirements that must be possessed is having good character with society and people. That Islam is not simply restricted to the idea of worshiping with Allah, and that the entirety of Islam is contained in my relationship with Allah. I can do with people anything I want. It won't have an impact. Why? Because with Allah, my relationship is good. Had that been the case, no Imam would have been named Kadhim. No Imam would have been named Jawad. No Imam would have been named Mujtaba, because these attributes and the greatness of this attribute is the relationship of the Abd of Allah with humanity, not with Allah. A man is not Kadhim. A man does not suppress his anger with Allah, na'uzubillah. A man is not generous to Allah, na'uzubillah. Allah is generous to man. Allah is the one who restricts anger on the people. But when we are Kadhim, when we are Jawad, when we are Mujtaba, when we are generous with Allah's creation. And by knowing that our Imam is given these attributes as an honorific, as it's an honor for him to be known as Al-Kadhim, is a lesson, a very important lesson, that to be a good Muslim, you have to be good to the people who live around you. When we look at Imam Al-Kadhim and we take pride and fakhr, this is my Imam. My Imam is honored by the title Al-Kadhim, one who suppresses his anger, one who was patient when he had the right to be angry. Angry with who? With people. If I want to be a Shia of Imam Al-Kadhim, that means that my character with people has to reflect the character of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. When we take a look, this is the lesson that was taught to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inni bu'ithtu li'utammimu makarim al-akhlaq. That our Holy Prophet said that I have been sent to perfect the noble characteristics in you people. The worship of Allah is part of our religion. But along with that is to have noble character and good characteristics. Part of our religion is that our relationship with Allah is one of piety and taqwa, but part of our relation with Allah is that our good dealings and relationships with the people. And these two cannot be separated, because this is why Allah says that those for whom heaven, the gardens of heaven, whose boundaries are the extent of the heavens and the earth. Even this, there are narrations that say it's even greater than this. And understand something. This is discussing one garden. That the garden Allah prepares, one garden that Allah prepares for one muttaqi, one pious person. The extent of that garden will be whatever is encompassed in the heavens and the earth. There's a narration, and we're taking an aside here from it, but to explain to you why we have a desire for heaven, Why heaven is something you aim for and desire for. You can't understand what this heaven is. In one narration, it says that Jibreel made the decision that he wanted to see the expanse of Allah's heavens. So Jibreel began from the corner of heaven and began to fly. And he flew for a distance of 500 years before he became tired. When after 500 years in distance of flight, Jibreel became tired, he landed in heaven as he tried to pass over it. Where he landed in heaven, he found a house. As he sat in this place next to this house, one of the Hur al-Ain, one of the creations of Allah that live in heaven, came out and greeted Jibreel. And said, Assalamu alaikum, and Jibreel replied, Alaykum assalam. And the Hur al-Ain asked, who are you and what are you doing? And he replied, I am Jibreel, the angel of Allah. I have desired to see how great are the heavens that Allah has created for the mu'mineen. So I started to fly a distance of 500 years ago. I have been flying continuously for this 500-year distance. And now I became tired, so I became to take a rest. And this Hur al-Ain replies to Jibreel, Jibreel, you are incapable of completing this task. Utruku, leave it. And Jibreel says to this Hur al-Ain, why do you say that? And the Hur al-Ain replied, oh Jibreel, the 500-year distance that you have traveled, you have now but reached the center of one of the gardens of one of the mu'mineen that Allah has dedicated to them in heaven. That after 500 years of distance of your flying, you, Jibreel, not a normal person, you only reach the middle of one garden, of one mu'min. This heaven that Allah promises, u'iddat lil muttaqeen, that it is that which is prepared for those who are muttaqeen, who are pious. Look at how Allah describes the piety of this muttaqi. He says, alladhina, those are muttaqeen, yunfiquna fis sarra'i wal dharra'i. There are those who spend in the way of Allah in ease and in difficulty. That's whether you have plenty of wealth and income, and from that you make a dedication to the path of Allah, or you have little income or no income, but still you make a sacrifice from your wealth for the sake of Allah. If you want to be pious, it's not only those acts of worship. This is an act of worship of Allah too. And it goes further. وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. That to be a muttaqi, you have to be one who suppresses or restrains his anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And to be able to forgive people and forgiving of people. These characteristics of social dealing, these characteristics of akhlaq are a point of being a pious person. Never imagine that if you mistreat even one human being, one animal of Allah, that you can consider yourself to be a pious individual, that your acts of worship will save you. Rather, we have narrations that show the importance of akhlaq. We have one narration that says that an indecent woman, when she came before one of the representatives of Allah, it was said that this woman is a woman of heaven. And the people in shock said, how can you say that she is a woman of heaven? She is known to be an indecent woman. The representative of Allah said that there was a dog who was thirsty and couldn't get to the water in the well. And he was begging for water in front of the well. This woman took off her shoe and lowered it into the well to catch water for this dog and quenched the thirst of this dog by the water in her shoe. And because of that attribute of good character and showing kindness to Allah's creation, Allah forgave all of her past sins. This is the example of character that we're associated with, that Imam al-Kadhim himself is associated with this good character, as well as he is the one who educates us about good character. Before we talk about the attribute of Imam al-Kadhim's good character, there are two narrations. The first of which, our seventh Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says ما تساب الاثنان إلا أن حط الأعلى إلى المرتبة الأسفل. In teaching good character, Imam al-Kadhim makes the statement, he says that there are no two people who curse at each other, asaba, and that they use bad language for each other, except that one who is in a higher status and has better character reduces himself to the character and to the status of the one who is lower. The lesson of the Imam here is when you fight with someone, don't fight with them on the level that they are on. If you have a disagreement with someone, disagree with someone based upon your character. If someone curses at you, someone uses bad language with you, it's not okay that I reply to him in his kind. I reply to him the same way he spoke to me. Why? Because that means my character is no better than his, and both of us are now the equivalent of the worst of us. This is the importance of akhlaq Imam is teaching. Be conscientious of how you approach akhlaq and character. This is very important in today's world, that we think our character is great, but if someone talks to me in a bad way, I'll respond to him in kind. No. Imam al-Kadhim is teaching that responding in kind, responding in the same attribute, is lowering yourself and losing that goodness of your character and behavior. Don't lose the goodness and the character of your behavior. The second hadith that we take a look from our seventh Imam in relationship to character that he wants to teach us. He says, لَيْسَ حُسْنُ الْجَوَارِ كَفُّ الْعَضَاءِ وَلَكِنْ حُسْنُ الْجَوَارِ الصَّبْرُ عَلَى الْعَضَاءِ. Imam al-Kadhim, in teaching character, makes the statement. He says, it doesn't mean to be a good neighbor that you don't torture, abuse, adha is disturb your neighbor. Being a good neighbor doesn't mean that you don't disturb my neighbor. I'm a good neighbor, I don't disturb my neighbor. He replies, he says, but rather being a good neighbor is that you are patient when you are disturbed. That your character, when someone is disturbing you, demonstrates, are you a good neighbor? Are you a good person? One of the attributes of an imam is that when he teaches something or he tells a mu'min to do something, he perfects that attribute in himself first. And what an imam forbids someone from doing, an imam has never done himself. When we look at the personality of our seventh imam and we see him as al-Kadhim, one who suppresses his anger, we see that first and foremost is that no matter how the people dealt with him and abused him, our imam never replied in kind to them. In the famous narration that in the city of Medina, there was a man who used to come and curse and abuse Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. And his abuse of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far had gotten so bad that his companions became so frustrated with the abuse, they made the decision that they would kill this man. And Imam Musa ibn Ja'far replies, he says, shall I not deal with him myself? Do you want to see how I would deal with him? And his companion says, yes, certainly. If we can see the example of the grandson of the Holy Prophet, then it will be a lesson for us. And Imam al-Kadhim heads out to see this man. When he goes to the house of this man, very famously, this man had a farm. And Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, when he began to approach from a distance, the man saw him coming and started yelling and complaining, you're destroying my crops, you're destroying my crops. Imam al-Kadhim has never destroyed anyone's property and never done anything wrong. But this man started hurling accusations at the Imam. When Imam al-Kadhim came close, he said to the man, you think I've destroyed your crops? How much do you think you would earn from all of this that you've planted? And the man replies, he says, I can't know the unseen. I don't know what was going to happen. The Imam says, I didn't ask you what you will. I asked, what would you have liked to? What would you hope to? And the man replied with a ridiculous amount of saying, I wanted to earn 100 dirhams. And it cost me 100 dirhams to plant them. Imam al-Kadhim took out from his pocket 300 dirhams. The cost of what was planted, the increase that he had hoped for, that was his ideal, and even 100 more than what he could have imagined, and handed him this purse and left. And when he came back to the masjid the next day, this same man who would come in and curse Imam Musa ibn Ja'far came forward, said salam to him and said, Allahu ya'lamu haythu yaj'ala rasalata. That certainly Allah knows best where to place his messengership and his authority on this earth. All of the companions of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far who were ready to kill this man became astonished about the fact that this man who used to curse the Imam was now saying that certainly Allah knows best where to put his authority on this earth. And Imam al-Kadhim simply replied to his companions, are you not satisfied that the goodness in me was greater than the evil in him, that I was able to overcome him with my goodness? This is a lesson for us. That don't reduce yourself to the status of the enemy or of the person who is against you or the person who is harassing you, but rather let your goodness overcome them. And be patient in the goodness of this overcoming their evil, because it takes time. That when we are truly good, not when we don't harass someone, but when we are patient when we are harassed. This is the lesson of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. That in the history of Islam, in the history of the A'immah, there was no one who was more deserving of being angry and wasn't angry than Imam al-Kadhim. Hence, he was given the laqab al-Kadhim. When we see the history of our seventh Imam, and we see that this Imam of ours, this Madloom Imam of ours, had the right to be angry, but he wasn't. We see that some of the reasons why he had right to be angry was that it was, in some narrations, it said it was his own family that caused the Imam to be imprisoned. Imam Musa ibn Ja'far's imamate lasted for a period of about 35 years. About 10 years or 10 years under Ma'mun, another 11 years under Mahdi, 1 year under Hadi, and then finally the last 13 years of his life under Harun. Of this 35 year period, at least it's said in some narrations, at least 14 years were spent in prison. Others say that after the time of Ma'mun, that after the first 10 years of his imamate, the Imam was constantly coming and going from prison. And that this period in prison that the Imam spent was actually the final period where he was eventually poisoned, was caused by one of his own relatives. Famously, when the Imam was in Medina, one of his relatives came to visit him and said that I'm going to Baghdad. And Imam Musa ibn Ja'far said to him, why are you going to Baghdad? And his relative said, I have debts, I have business there, I'm going to make some money, to earn some money to pay for my debts and pay for my obligation. And Imam Musa ibn Ja'far knew that this person was going to lay false accusations against him in front of the Khalifa. So Imam al-Kadhim said to him, don't go, I'll take care of your debts. And the man said, no, I have obligations, I must go. And Imam al-Kadhim again repeated, stay, don't go so far away. We'll create a way for you to have money and to be able to survive. You don't have to go so far that you have to go to Baghdad. Don't go, you'll fall into trouble. But this person had such animosity against Imam Musa ibn Ja'far that even though Imam al-Kadhim was saying that without your effort, we'll take care of your expenses, don't go. This relative of his insisted and said, I must go. And when he left the company of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, famously Imam al-Kadhim, in some of the books of history it's written, said that this relative of mine will be responsible for the spilling of my blood. That Imam al-Kadhim's own relatives had created such an environment that they were the ones who had hatred for the Imam, that they wanted him to be killed, na'uzubillah. And yet Imam al-Kadhim, instead of punishing them, threatening them, separating himself from them, hiding his affairs from them, continued to offer them aid, continued to offer them kindness, continued to offer them support, though they intended the murder of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Famously, this relative, when he goes before the court of Harun, Harun asks him, what news have you brought from Medina? And this relative Imam al-Kadhim says that my cousin, Musa ibn Ja'far, collects khums and zakat from the people such that he possesses large amounts of wealth in multiple different currencies. And if he is given the opportunity, I believe he will raise an army against you, O Khalifa. And that famously Harun looked at his court and he says, now, O wazirs, O intelligent people, now do I have enough proof that I can put this one who wants to overthrow my government into prison. And that on the basis of this false witness of this relative of Imam al-Kadhim, the court of Harun agreed that Imam Musa ibn Ja'far should be put into prison. Famously, in return, Harun gave this man large sums of wealth. In one book, it's written that when they came to present this wealth to the man, he happened to be in the restroom. And as he was in the restroom, a sickness overcame him because of the evil he had committed against Imam al-Kadhim, and his insides and his intestines came out of him. And he was in pain, in the throes of death in the toilet, when they came outside into his room and says, we have brought you all of your wealth that Harun promised you. And the man from inside the restroom replied, he says, I am in here dying. What good is wealth to me now? He had finished the affair of causing and bringing about the imprisonment of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. The imprisonment of Imam al-Kadhim is one where they tortured him and abused him. If you read the ziyarat of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, we say to him, O Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, Anta mu'adhibun fi ka'r as-sujun. You are the one who was tortured in the depths of the prisons. The imprisonment of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far was in places where there was no sunlight, there was no fresh air. Famously, my Imam could neither stand up straight, nor could he lay down flat. And in these conditions, he was in prison. Yet still, the jailers would say that when we go to the cell of Musa ibn Ja'far, we hear him praying to Allah in thanks that, oh Allah, I asked you to give me time where there is no distraction, that I can only worship you. Oh Allah, even in this condition, I thank you that you have left me to worship you freely. But they tortured my Imam so much. They tortured Imam Musa ibn Ja'far so much that at the end of his life, he was heard saying, oh Allah, I can take no more of the torture that they place on me. Let me be returned to you, oh Allah. How did they torture Imam al-Kadhim? It's famously narrated in a very painful and heart-wrenching hadith that Imam al-Kadhim simply wanted to know the time of day because the cell had no light, had no air, that when he went to the top of the cell to look out, whether to see the time of prayer or but to take a breath of fresh air, that Sindi bin Shahik Mal'oon struck the face of the Imam to prevent him. And the Imam replied, I have done no wrong to you, then why do you strike at my face? In this condition, the Imam was given a poison that impacted his body alone for 3 days. My Imam was not only in a prison, suffering from the effects of poison, but famously he had on his hands and his feet chains and weighted chains that prevented him from moving. In this condition, my Imam suffered. Harun invited the respected and honorable people to see Imam al-Kadhim in this condition, to say that, look, this Musa ibn Ja'far dies of natural causes. There are no wounds or marks on him that would show you that I have done anything wrong for him to die. Famously, Imam al-Kadhim, he tried to speak up, that to say that no, don't bear witness, but that they have poisoned me. And in return, the Mal'oon pressed Imam al-Kadhim further. This is that son of Sayyidah Zahra, whose shahadat is so painful for us, because while he was imprisoned in life, that he was imprisoned after his death. When Imam al-Kadhim became shaheed and he died because of this poison and the abuse that was given to him, Harun wanted to break the hopes of the people that Imam al-Kadhim was alive and was their supporter. So famously, Harun had the body of Imam al-Kadhim carried out to the bridge of Baghdad, where people would come and go from. And a caller called out, Hadha al-Imam al-Rawafid, that this is the Imam of the rejectors, come and see that he has died. And that Imam al-Kadhim's body was left on this bridge for 3 days in chains. There is a narration that is heartbreaking that says that one old woman, when she came to this bridge, she saw a body there, and when she saw who it was from the callers and she asked, whose body has been left on the bridge? It is against the rights of a Muslim that his body should be left like this. They said, this is Musa ibn Ja'far, whose body has been left like this. The woman, a lover of the children of Sayyidah Zahra, began to become worried and frantic, and she began to rush and run through the streets of Baghdad looking for someone to help and save Imam al-Kadhim. In this instance, it said that she famously ran across one of the cousins of Imam al-Kadhim. This cousin of Imam al-Kadhim had some authority in the government of Harun. When he saw this old woman frantically rushing and worried in the streets of Baghdad, he said, "Oh woman, I see you in a condition that it is as if your son has died." The heartbreaking this statement this woman made. She says, "Hasha lillah, God forbid, if my son was to die, I am alive for him." He says, "Then why do I see you, old woman, so concerned and worried?" She says, "It is the son of Zahra who has died, and there is no one to bury him." This cousin of Imam al-Kadhim came to know of the Shahadat of Imam al-Kadhim. He went to the bridge. He collected the body of his cousin. "Hi, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. For 3 days your body was left on a bridge." They said when they went to bury Imam al-Kadhim, he still had the steel bracelets on him. He still had the chains on him. When they cut the chains, the locksmith who cut the chains wept. He says the flesh under the chains of Imam Musa ibn Ja'far has worn away because of how long the chains have been on him. "Oh mu'min, you wept at the sight of the flesh of Imam al-Kadhim under the chains. Had you but seen the body of Hussein ibn Ali, whose flesh had been trampled under the horses' hooves. I, Hussein, was the one, that son of Zahra, whose chest had been mixed with his backbone." Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. Martyrdom ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
Sayyidi Mawla, 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 Sayyidi Mawla. Ibn Zahra ya Musa bin Ja'far, Ibn Zahra ya Musa. Sayyidi Mawla, Sayyidi Mawla, Sayyidi Mawla. कैसा कैदी है कि मरने पे भी आजाद नहीं, کیسا قیدی ہے کہ مرنے پہ بھی آزاد نہیں، کیسی غربت ہے جنازے پہ بھی فریاد نہیں، میرے مولا پہ ہوئی کون سی بیداد نہیں، ہائے نزدیک کوئی رونے کو اولاد نہیں، بے کس و تنہا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، ملکہ قم کا پدر، والی مشہد کا پدر، سیرت مصطفی وارث حوض کوثر، ہائے مظلوم جنازہ ہے سرے راہ گزر، جبکہ موجود ہے رونے کو پسر اور دختر، دل پہ تھا لاٹا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، قید میں 14 برس کیسے گزارے ہوں گے، صورت اشک مسلط ستارے ہوں گے، تو زنجیر بھلا کس نے اتارے ہوں گے، غمزدہ عرش پہ قرآن کے پارے ہوں گے، کیسے دوں پرسا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، قید تنہائی تھی اور موسی کاظم مولا، قید تنہائی تھی اور موسی کاظم مولا، ختم بینائی تھی اور موسی کاظم مولا، ستم آرائی تھی اور موسی کاظم مولا، موت گھبرائی تھی اور موسی کاظم مولا، وقت کڑا تھا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، حاکم وقت نے کیسا یہ ستم ڈھایا ہے، حاکم وقت نے کیسا یہ ستم ڈھایا ہے، قبر پر مادر حسنین کو تڑپایا ہے، زہر خرموں میں میرے مولا کو پلوایا ہے، جسد پاک کو مزدوروں سے اٹھوایا ہے، روتی تھی زہرا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، ابن جعفر ناصری پہ ستم پر روئے، ابن جعفر ناصری پہ ستم پر روئے، توق پر روئے نہ زنجیر قدم پر روئے، ہاں اگر روئے تو بس شاہ امم پر روئے، اپنے جد عابد بیمار کے غم پر روئے، پڑھتے تھے نوحہ موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، کوئی ایسا نہ تھا میت کو کفن پہنائے، مشہد و قم میں کوئی جا کے خبر پہنچائے، رونے والے نہ تھے مزدور جنازہ لائے، گریہ کرنے کو جنازے پہ پرندے آئے، آسماں رویا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، السلام ہے میرے مظلوم غریب الغربا، السلام ہے رسن جور، السلام ہے رسن و جور میں پابند جفا، السلام ہے شرف باب ہوائج مولا، الوداع سرور و ریحان کے مولا، آقا دیتے ہیں پرسا یا موسیٰ بن جعفر ابن الزہرا، یا موسیٰ بن جعفر سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، سیدی مولا، Hussein, Ya Hussein.
یا حسین یا حسین. کاظم نے قضا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی یہ ساتھ و مظلوم ہے فریاد خدا کی یہ ساتھ و مظلوم ہے فریاد خدا کی ایک میلی سی چادر ہے جو ہے رنگ میں دھانی ایک میلی سی چادر ہے جو ہے رنگ میں دھانی تصویر ہے میت حسن سبز قبا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی مرنے پہ بھی پائی نہیں مولا نے رہائی مرنے پہ بھی پائی نہیں مولا نے رہائی زنجیریں ہیں پہنے ہوئے فریاد خدا کی زنجیریں ہیں پہنے ہوئے فریاد خدا کی دشمن کو نہیں فکر سرا تو غم دوزخ دشمن کو نہیں فکر سرا تو غم دوزخ میت پل بغداد پہ ہے راہنما کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی آیا نہ کفن دینے کو گھر سے کوئی باہر آیا نہ کفن دینے کو گھر سے کوئی باہر یہ قدر زمانے میں ہوئی آل ابا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی شیعوں کا ہے یہ حال کہ لب کھل نہیں سکتے شیعوں کا ہے یہ حال کہ لب کھل نہیں سکتے رو کے ہوئے آہیں ہے کہ بندش ہے قبا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی کوئی نہیں رونے کو مگر شور ہے پھر بھی کوئی نہیں رونے کو مگر شور ہے پھر بھی یثرب سے چلی آتی ہے فریاد رضا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی یہ ساتھ و مظلوم ہے فریاد خدا کی بغداد میں ہے شور کے کاظم نے قضا کی حسین 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 حسین
توجہ زیارت السلام علیکم یا رسول اللہ السلام علیکم یا نبی اللہ السلام علیکم یا حبیب اللہ السلام علیکم یا خیرۃ اللہ السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ بسم الله وبالله وفي سبيل الله وعلى ملة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله والسلام على أولياء الله. السلام عليك يا ولي الله. السلام عليك يا حجة الله. السلام عليك يا باب الله. أشهد أنك أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وتلوت الكتاب حق تلاوته وجاهدت في الله حق جهاده وصبرت على الأذى في جنبه محتسبا وعبدته مخلصا حتى أتاك اليقين. أشهد أنك أولى بالله وبرسوله وأنك ابن رسول الله حقا. أبرأ إلى الله من أعدائك وتقرب إلى الله بموالاتك. أتيتك يا مولاي عارفا بحقك مواليا لأوليائك معاديا لأعدائك فاشفع لي عند ربك. السلام عليك جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء. السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس وعنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض توسلي ابن موسى الرضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك الصاحب الأسر والزمان. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا من أعوانك وأنصارك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. This concludes our program for tonight. Thank you for joining us. We thank our guest speaker, Sheikh Bilal Husain, for taking time out of his busy schedule and addressing the gathering of Masjid-e-Ali tonight. Thank you very much. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase his tawfiqat, and he continues to visit us, inshallah, in future as well. The upcoming programs that we have as follows: tomorrow night, Wednesday, March 10th, inshallah, we will have the Amal of Shab Miraj and Bi'sat of Rasulullah. That program, inshallah, will start at 7:30 p.m. with the Amal, followed by a brief session in reference to the Bi'sat of Rasulullah. And of course, Thursday, Shab Jummah program will coincide with the Safar of Imam Husain, 28th of Rajab. That program, inshallah, starts at 7:30 with Hadith Kisad and Dua Kumail. Inshallah, do join us for all of those programs. And inshallah, we look forward to having you on. Please recite Surah Fatiha for your marhumin as well as the sponsors marhumin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد